I've been back to the town again, trying to find out what happened. I looked for the curiosity shop, but there's nothing there. Like something reached out from the heavens and ground the street to dust. Nothing but fine powder, russet-coloured, tasted of copper. There are no wains in the old town, but I can hear them. Screeches on the wind. They sound angry that I can go where they can't. I thought about trying to stay there. What better place than outside of the reach of their long claws? But my head hurt after too many hours there. Pain just above my right temple. I want to read you a different story today. This one's about a lake on the edge of the town. I went in search of it, but the pain in my eye got too much. There's something dark there. I could hear the water, hear it whispering in the trees. I couldn't find it. I've come back to my camp. It's dark now. Earlier on today I saw smoke rising in the distance, so there's still people out there, I hope. The Wains don't seem to have need of fires, or heat, or anything. Wish I knew what they were. Are they visitors, or are they ghosts? I don't know. I'm not sure I want to get close enough to find out. Tomorrow I go back to Bleakwood, try and find some answers. In the meantime, I'll read you the next story. It's good to have a reason to speak. Deep roots. Ripples ran along the surface of the lake, emanating from an epicenter buried within its depths. The surrounding shore shifted and groaned as it heeded the ancient command and awakened silent sentinels. There were no human witnesses. These woods were rarely trodden upon, and the men who braved the twisted path seeking Bleakwood's watery heart always came in supplication, their offerings layered in the silty depths, each one resting upon the last until they too were ravaged by time and decay. The name of what these people sought had been lost to the ages, but the fear of it was passed down to each new generation of prey. Its power offered to those foolish or desperate enough not to care about the sacrifices demanded in return, until it was time to pay them. Standing in the cemetery of Bleakwood Parish Church, Steve shivered as the cool dragged across his skin, summoning his attention away from the box being lowered with agonizing slowness into the earth. The grating of the ropes set his teeth on edge until the coffin hit the soil with a dull thud, the only acknowledgement from the ground that he was committing his whole world into his keeping. Molly had died at winter's edge. Now its biting cold turned Steve's tears to frozen tracks upon his cheeks. He had thought the night before her accident had been the worst of his life, but he had barely broached the depths of his despair. Now he stood at the edge of an abyss, and although it only measured 6 feet deep, he feared he'd spend an eternity falling into it. He'd never known how to let Molly go. His wife was the fulcrum upon which his world pivoted. Their parents lived on the same streets when they were children. The two had grown up playing in each other's homes, running the length and breadth of the surrounding fields and peddling their steel stallions as they battled witches and dragons, Molly leaning over the handlebars to wave her twigged wand, casting a spell over his heart that would never fade. She had stood at his side as they had crossed each milestone towards adulthood. Friendships, sex, exams, university, jobs, a home. Upon these foundations, they had built a life. His work as a fireman had been a constant strain, but Molly had understood, and her nightly kiss had been his reward every time he returned to her. Molly's work was less dangerous but no less rewarding, giving voice to Bleakwood's populace of the local newspaper. They were a team, despite few understanding why, and everything Steve did was for her. No man could love a woman more, and only he and Molly knew the adversities they had overcome, the opportunities and follies of youth that had nearly split them apart in their early 20s. But he'd fought hard to win her back. No one could have pointed the finger of blame at him when the only child Molly had ever carried passed into dreams before its first breath. Steve alone had held them together when the misery of their constant failures to conceive shattered them into pieces that no longer fit. Molly had never blamed him, only herself. Yet even at her graveside, Molly's parents would not look at him, while the whispers of her friends provided another layer to a eulogy. one that condemned him. Shutting them out, Steve focused on the vicar as she committed Molly to the ground, keeping his gaze fixed on the polished oak box as people cast their flowers onto it, tossing away their grief with ease. Finally, the crowd walked away, taking their accusations with them. There was no peace in the silence. Nothing could change what had happened. Molly was gone. He flinched as his father put a hand on his shoulder. "Time to say goodbye, son." "This wasn't what I wanted." Steve glanced at his father, seeking the absolution his conscience denied him. "I know you loved her. All we can do is make our wishes and let the others decide how to fulfill them. I asked for a child. They blessed me with you. I asked for your mother to no longer be in pain, and they chose how to deliver that. Your grandfather made his bargain from a place of love too." Steve stared at his father. Where was his lack of bitterness? His wife and mother's gravestones rested in this place, the same as Molly's. Both father and son's hopes and dreams had been twisted and perverted. The only difference was that his mother had gone to her grave still loving her husband. His dad stared at the coffin with a nauseated expression. "You want me to stay?" That he would offer to go through this again showed how much he loved his son, but it was not his responsibility. "I need to do this alone. It's the way it's done, isn't it?" He glanced at the retreating crowds. "Do any of them know about the bargain? We can't be the only family who went to the lake." His father stared at the coffin. "We aren't, but the gift stays in families, passed from father to son. Most don't know, not even the vicar. Molly's family knew nothing. Molly was innocent." "Then they hate me for me alone. Actually comforting." His father looked uncertain. He'd never asked Steve what he'd wished for, but the results had been evident. Still, his father was here, where many would have walked away. "I'll see you soon, then." Steve watched his father follow the mourners, chased by the rising wind. Free of their judgment, he impatiently waved away the men waiting to cover the coffin with dirt. They exchanged worried looks, but they gave him the requested space. They must have seen enough guilty men over the years to know which had unfinished business. Despite the emptiness of the graveyard, Steve knew he was not alone as he clambered into the hole. He wiped muddy hands on his neatly pressed trousers, then slid the bolts to open the coffin's lid. His wife's body was still fresh from the chemicals the funeral director had pumped into her. He had requested her makeup to be natural, but he could see now that was a mistake. Her pale skin did nothing to hide the scars where the metal had sliced her flesh. Even her blonde hair looked faded, as death robbed her of vitality. But he knew what made her Molly was still inside her. It was what they were coming for. He stroked her rigid skin, shuddering at how cold it was. She'd been in the outskirts of the old town borders when it had happened. A witness had said Molly was driving normally, and if they hadn't known better, they would have thought the tree moved towards the car, not the other way around. He had told everyone she was going to stay with a friend, but his story was as desperate as his bargain. The suitcases sprung through the shattered windows to stretch her belongings across the ground had confirmed it was no suicide. "Be careful what you wish for. Leave no loopholes," his father had warned. "Please don't let her leave," had been the desperate cry of his heart. The same heart now thudded against its rib cage until he feared it would give out. More soil drifted from the sides of the hole, making the open wound in the earth wider. He could hear the wind becoming impatient, coming for what it had been promised. It had been quiet while the funeral took place, but now it demanded attention. He blinked as soil slowly drifted down the edges of the grave, swallowing the sick taste in his mouth. He had been warned, but part of him believed it would never happen. It had been a fool's hope after everything he had seen. The bottom of the coffin jerked suddenly as something probed the wood from underneath, searching for weakness. He yanked his hand from his wife's face as the wood beneath her split, gagging as the squirming darkness pushed its way through and wrapped around his wife's body. Knotted tree roots slithered across her rigid skin like vines. For one terrible moment, he thought he heard Molly gasp, but it was the air being crushed from her lungs in one final decaying breath. A second later, he heard the cracking of twigs and realized her ribs had shattered. He screamed as her arms and legs flung themselves towards him, the roots folding her in half to crunch her through the tiny hole and claim her for the earth. Retching, he scrambled out of the grave. Bending double, he vomited onto the neatly cut grass. Only once he was empty did he slide the lid back over the coffin, covering the evidence of his sin. He stared at the peaceful ground. How many empty graves lay within this cemetery? The dead rarely rested in peace in Bleakwood, but the living were the true sufferers, and he had suffered enough. With leaden steps, he left the graveyard and headed in the direction of the lake, back to where the whole nightmare started. He remembered when his father and grandfather had told him about the lake. The night after he saw Molly with the man from the city. He thought she was going there for interviews, but she was meeting him, laying with him, loving him. His first bargain broke Molly's heart and brought her back to him. The second rid her of the child she carried, unwilling to take the risk it was not his. He'd intended to give her other children to make up for that one, never imagining his bargain would rob her of all her future choices. But good had come from it. She clung to him in the wake of her hysterectomy, afraid he would leave her while she was at her lowest. In this, at least, he was the man she needed, reassuring her of his love no matter what. He had shielded her from the true cost of her infidelity and paid for it every night in his dreams, reliving his side of the bargain over and over. A fire he had reached a little too late, a voice he pretended he hadn't heard through the flames, accelerant he added and blamed on others. Molly was his reward for the accumulating shadows upon his soul, and he cherished her. But it had not been enough for Molly. There had always been another man, another temptation, the dream of a better life away from Bleakwood, away from him. Her parents' anger was justified. He had reduced her to nothing, and in their last argument he had known there was nothing left to bargain with. And so he had made that fateful last deal. Words offered, without knowing what the solution would be, only that Bleakwood always fulfilled its side of the bargain. He stood at the edge of the lake, surveying the town's true kingdom. He'd gone diving after his first bargain and seen the bodies that lay in its murky depths, bones jutting out of the soil, one on top of the other, the bargainers and their loved ones, treated the same in death. They would have taken him in time, but he had no intention of waiting for the roots. Please don't let her leave. He had forgotten to add the word me. If he had, perhaps she would be alive with him, or he would be dead with her. At least he could resolve that last mistake himself. Wading out into the cool water, he heard voices drift up from the depths. It was Molly's he listened for. She was not there yet. He could almost imagine the roots passing her through the earth, wrapping around their precious bundle to deliver her to her last resting place. He waded out, every step and stroke taking him closer. His mother and grandmother were down there too. His father's and grandfather's bargains had made it a certainty. His father would be sad to be left behind, but one day the roots would carry him home too, and they would all be together again. Reaching the centre of the lake, he felt the power he had only spoken to from the shore surge around him, tugging him deeper. He stopped kicking, clutching to the mental image of his wife as he sunk into the lake's cool embrace, hoping that when he next saw her, she would understand he had acted from a place of love. The water slipped inside him as though it was always meant to be there. Not even the pain could rob him of his peace. He and Molly would be one in death, as they had been in life. Everything he had done had ensured it. As his soul shook free of his body, dropping the veil of mortal secrets from before his eyes, he understood the truth. In seeking heaven, he had committed them both to hell. Finally, he heard Molly. Her scream was his death song, and with his last seconds of life, Steve smiled. Down here, Molly could no longer escape him. Finally, he had made her his forever. Deep Roots was written by Helen Lane and narrated by Paul Stephenson. Helen Lane is a writer of YA and adult fantasy and horror. She lives in London with her family and a puppy who is determined to eat every book she owns. You can find her on Twitter at @HFLane_writing. Bleakwood is a Hollow Stone Press production. Join us next time for more tales from Bleakwood.